Hey everybody, welcome to a very somber and stupid emergency broadcast of the Muckrake Podcast. I'm Jared Yates, Sexton. I'm here with Nick Hauselman. How you doing, bud? Did you get some sleep?
I was in bed and I wasn't moving and my eyes were closed. So I suppose does that count?
Man, I've had those kinds of nights before for sure.
Yeah, but I was up early and right back on the phone and all the things you're not supposed to do. And yeah, it's not great. Really, it is not great, and it's a reckoning. And having to look through the right's responses today has not made it any better.
I'll be honest with you, and by the way, of course, we're recording this and speaking about the 2024 election in which Donald Trump has not just won a plurality of the votes, he has won the popular vote, might very well go over 300 electoral votes. Nick, there is a lot for us to discuss in the next few days. We just want to get some thoughts on the record. I think people want to hear from us. I have been dismayed by how the right has reacted. I've been dismayed by how liberals have reacted, how Democrats have reacted. It's bad enough that Donald Trump has won a second term and that we now have the fight of our lives on our hands, which is something that I thought was a possibility and something I've been warning about for nearly a decade now. But on top of that, I not only is there a vibe shift because a lot of people went into this thing thinking there was no possibility Donald Trump could win. They got hauled into the Harris campaign and sort of a messaging by a lot of influencers and personalities. Also fantasies about what America is and what it has become. But watching the reaction starting last night and then moving into this morning, and, you know, I asked you, I said this morning, I said, how are you feeling? Right. And I think both of us we have mixtures of a lot of different things. I'm sad. I'm worried. I'm determined. And quite frankly, Nick, I'm pissed off. I'm very, very angry for a variety of reasons that we can start talking about this morning. But yeah, the reaction to it sucks. The reality of it sucks. It all sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it was almost like a surprising lack of emotional response this morning that I'm having in a way that, the things that were gnawing at me this entire time, I kind of got on board. There was a vibe. It seemed like, okay, let's get excited and whatever, but I never really fully embraced it. And it's easy to say that now, but I'm just trying to be honest. And you start really reflecting. I did a long thread on X this morning about it, but are we surprised that this is a result after, if you look at this in the historical context of Biden's campaign in 2024, it was an all-time the worst. We want to point at Trump being a terrible campaigner, this now, whatever. The results base indicates that he actually did a good job. He did what he needed to do. In fact, they must have seen this in their polling. They didn't really do much the last few weeks, right? And we were like, gosh, this must be they already know they've lost. There's no way that they could have looked at internals and felt that way. And especially because the polls that we got obviously were completely wrong, like so wrong, that we were worried they were inflating the GOP's numbers, Jared. And in fact, they were doing the opposite. Like if that is not an excoriation of like the poll just need to go away. We can't use them anymore. Nothing is going to be worth looking at anymore. But I have a feeling that they looked at that and knew that they didn't have to do too much. And then they could unleash whatever they wanted to unleash. She didn't gain anything in any demographic except for white college educated women. Everything else across the board, as far as I've seen so far, he increased his base and increase the number of votes. He'll get more votes, I think, than he got last time. I'll get your response to that, and then we'll start. We have to go back into the past and look more about how we got here from 10 years ago.
Yeah, a lot to unpack in everything you just said. First things first, Nick, and I wanted to say this to our listeners, and I think what you said is a really good jumping off point. What you said about how you feel this morning, I think there's a reason why you feel that way. And, I often say, I joke, like, we have the best community in terms of like a podcast that there is. But I also joke that we're a self-selecting group of people, like we've heard from people who have said, like, I don't know, you guys sometimes feel too negative and you're taking too like critical of a view of the Democratic Party and what's going on in American politics. The people who listen to this show, they're like us. They want to look at what's actually happening, even though it's occasionally unsettling. we have a good time. We laugh. We're really good friends. I think that's one of the reasons why, this thing works. But we knew there was a chance he was going to win. We knew that the Democratic Party ran a faulty campaign at the presidential level. We knew that they ran a faulty campaign at the national level. We know that the Democratic Party has real faults in terms of how it appeals to people. And we know that Donald Trump and the Republican Party cynically has taken advantage of those things and has filled a vacuum that has not been talked about in this country. So as a result, my guess is this, Nick. The people who are listening to this, they're sad, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're scared, but they knew that this was a possibility because what have we been doing for the past 2 years? And actually, since we started this podcast, we have been calling it like we see it. We have been saying there's something growing in this country. And what has been one of the main themes over the past year and a half, Nick, we have talked about the fact that people don't want to admit it. But when you have a demagogue and you have a corporate media that doesn't actually want to deal with things, and you have another party that doesn't want to actually appeal to like what people want, the country moves to the right. We've talked about this. This country has been moving to the right for a while. The good news here is that we now see it in full view. I mean, we can continue living in a fantasy, believing that like this or that or whatever. What happened with the Harris campaign and the Democratic Party over the past year, and particularly over the last few months she's been the candidate? I don't know how else to say it. It's been a manic episode, Nick. It has been people who got very excited because Joe Biden stepped aside. And quite frankly, you know what the Harris campaign was good at? Creating rallies and spectacles and the feeling around it. We called it a vibes-based campaign. You have celebrities, you have influencers, you've got the right music, you've got the right photographs, you've got all this stuff. Look at her rallies, right? What happened last night is that magical thinking ran headfirst into harsh reality, which is that we have an authoritarian movement that is found purchase not just in the United States of America, but around the world. It's happening because of intentional worsening inequality that needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form. And by the way, people like Joe Scarborough, who are spending this morning blaming this on gay and trans people, you can go fuck yourself, period. That's not what happened here. Right. And by the way, that's exactly what happened on Morning Joe this morning, by the way. Really upsetting stuff. But what you just said is this. We knew that this was a possibility. We knew that this was always going to be a distinct possibility. And now we have decisions to make. And that's being an adult. That's looking at it like, hopefully this is rock bottom and we can figure out a way otherwise. We can talk about what the Democratic Party did wrong. We can talk about what Kamala Harris did wrong as a candidate. We can talk about faulty strategy. We can talk about why Donald Trump was able to make inroads in all of this. And there are reasons for it. But as of today, we need to take a long look in the mirror, understand that reality is as we see it. There's no fudging around with this, Nick. He won a plurality of the Electoral College and the popular vote this time. Harris underperformed across the board. So the question is, are we going to put our heads in the sand and are we going to give up and sacrifice God knows how many vulnerable people? Or are we going to recalibrate and actually put up some type of an actual resistance? And I'm not putting a hashtag in front of that. Are we actually going to create something that is real and meaningful and creates lasting change? That's what's in front of us this morning.
I mean, I appreciate that that's your focus. I mean, as of this morning, there's nothing I can look at into the future that's going to make me feel any better.
You don't need to be there this morning.
Right. I mean,
and can I say something on that?
I mean, she spent $1 billion.
Oh, I know, of wasted money.
Ground game that we've ever seen, and granted, it was a short period because but again, it's the whole thing. Like this reckoning happened in 2016. The decisions that you're talking about that need to be made needed to have been made properly in 2016.
Absolutely. Yes.
And so because of that, because of pride and hubris and all, because Obama decided that we needed a way station with Biden, we are here in 2020.
That's part of it.
Now, the problem is that I will fully acknowledge that Bernie, I don't know if Bernie would have beaten Trump in 2020. I
don't either.
Been terrible too. So that was another problem that we needed to fix in 2016. Why was Biden running? I suspect that with your connections in the Democratic Party, that we're going to get more information about Biden's cognitive decline from as early as like 2012. And that is why we knew he didn't run in 2016. And we knew that Barack Obama did not want him to run in 2016. And that to put him in that situation in 2020 led us directly to this. And then to allow, someone, at least I had said this on the record, bringing in someone who's part of the Biden administration doesn't have, or the record is mucked up with Biden and open for all the kind of same, it's basically running Biden again with a candidate who really didn't do well at all in 2020 for a very distinct reason. So that whatever Biden's thing was, his last FU, I suppose, everybody, I'm going to have some amount of control and I'm going to make sure that I make this pick, I suppose is part of why that happened, and no one else pushed back because, again, the timing was so short. But, to do that, this candidate, Harris as a candidate, is not a good candidate. Now, if you want to point out the fact that like Hillary was the most qualified person we've ever had to run for president and didn't win primarily because she's a woman, then great. We knew that already. That nothing had changed much between 2016 and now. And yet, again, vibes. I want to believe that we had that progression, but we have been warning about this for the entire time since Trump came down the escalator, and before that as well, we had seen that. So I guess I am now angry. I am angry that is how that all played out, and it seemed like it wouldn't have taken them that much, looking into the future to understand that that's where we were when he picked her, when she assumed the mantle.
Well, I want to start because you just said a lot of things that I think touch on some really important stuff. First of all, looking at this and saying, I don't know how this ever gets fixed, like this morning, you don't need to figure that out this morning. Like, by the way, part of what we're doing here, I want to make this clear. We are trying to inform people. We want to make sure that this community has something from us today and some sort of ability to try and put this in context. That's what we do. But another part of this, Nick, you and I as friends and as partners on this, like, we take on different roles. And I think people listening to this who have partners, you understand that partners have different roles, right? Mm-hmm. You are not the person this morning who needs to be on the phone lines and like working on creating organizational structures. Mm-hmm. Do you know why I can? Because I am deeply trauma impacted and grew up in extreme poverty. When chaos happens, that's when I'm at my best, right? That's like when my shit kicks on. That's when all of a sudden I'm like, no, I'm going to figure this out. You right now, like in terms of like how you're going to process this, you are going to process it the way that you process it. Some people are going to be depressed this morning and not see any type of future. That's totally okay. You don't need to today. You don't need to see the exit out of this thing. You need to feel your feelings. You need to process it how you process it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I get it. And, listen, things change overnight. Things change within a year. A lot of things are different.
I see signs. I see signs in this election that tell me that there is a way out. Like this, and that's part of my job as an organizer and as a strategist. Like, I see things in this election that show me the way out. And by the way, you brought up Bernie Sanders. I'm not telling you that Bernie Sanders would have won in 2016, but the Democratic Party should have learned something from Bernie Sanders's campaign, right? They should have seen something as opposed to whatever. The other problem with this, and this goes off of what you just said, there should have been a flash primary for the position. I'm not sitting here telling you that Kamala Harris wouldn't have won it. But you know what, Nick? If there would have been a flash primary, it would have made her a better candidate. It would have made her more competitive. And you know what else it would have done? It would have forced her campaign to sit with what the Democratic coalition wanted in terms of policy. She went into it with Biden's campaign structure, with Biden's strategists and consultants. And what did she say? Where do I differ with Joe Biden? Not anywhere, except for I might have a Republican on my cabinet. That's bullshit. That doesn't work. What needed to happen was that there needed to be discussions about things like, how are we going to handle the Supreme Court? How are we going to change the economy? How are we actually going to protect democracy? How are we going to codify a woman's right to choose? Those things weren't discussed. She was not challenged. She didn't have challengers around her who made a quick debate and made sure that the Democratic coalition had discussions. Who decided the agenda here, Nick? It was a bunch of Democratic strategists who have been running to the right for decades now, and a corporate media that has been pushing the Democratic Party to the right for years. So what happens? You get a broadly unpopular agenda that everybody hoped would be saved by the fact that Donald Trump is a disgusting rapist criminal. That's it. And so you're right. She should have been challenged. There should have been a flash primary. It could have possibly changed things. But I do see things in this election. I do see things in the results and the numbers and quite frankly, the vibes of it that tell me that there's way out. But I think people need to feel their feelings this morning. And unfortunately, the fight continues. You can quit if you want, but the fight continues.
Right. I mean, I think the fear is that as his electorate is expanded and across every demographic except for that one, it does indicate that there is a fundamental shift in the country itself. And I do think that the right would have criticized anything and everything and anybody that they would have picked, and when they wring their hands, oh, I can't say this because they're going to hit us. They're going to hit you anyway, right? We've been saying that for all these years.
Yep.
But I do feel like there was a certain amount of traction gained by the way that Kamala Harris was anointed. And I have to believe, if you studied that deep down in those polls enough and the exit polls, that was a big part of this, because what we've been arguing about in terms of saving democracy from a guy that's trying to overturn it, it flipped it right back on the Democrats by doing what they did, and they could say that's not democratic. And remember, they'd like to reflect that back on anyway as a projection, but I think that was a compelling argument. And then the fact that you had a woman and a woman of color, again, is a double whammy in this country. And if it's not clear yet, if you don't think so, I think it's pretty clear to me that but here's the irony, right? The Republicans could pick a woman that might actually be able to win. Right. Somehow that could mask whatever the misogyny that exists. But you can't tell me, after seeing Hillary and then after Kamala and the results at the end, that there isn't some sort of deep rooted at least in the red side, an inability to vote for a woman for president. Look at the splits, when you have splits for the Senate races. So many of these Senate races where the Democrats win and Trump was won. That's the only explanation I can come up with. Arizona, they reject Carrie Lake, who is just a mirror image of Trump. She is a female version of Trump, and she can't even get close to winning. And yet Trump is going to win, relatively convincingly in Arizona. That there's no other explanation I can come up with besides misogyny.
Well, there's one other explanation in this, and it goes along with misogyny and racism and xenophobia, all the things that we're talking about. I've got some hard love for the people listening and the people of the United States of America. People can be fundamentally selfish, period. Like, you can go out and say, we need to save democracy. And by the way, we need to save democracy. But Nick, when democracy isn't delivering results that make people feel good or like they're getting what they want, they're going to turn their back on democracy. Yeah, this is something that we've seen throughout history. So the whole point of, hey, vote for me, I'll save democracy, that is important to say, but you have to couple it with some sort of an appeal that says, here's how life is going to materially improve for you, right? And by the way, what did we get? Goldman Sachs has supported me, right? I've got the support of all these like financial firms, all these economists or whatever. I'm going to make sure this continues. Oh, maybe I'll deal with housing, or maybe I'll make sure that Medicare does in-home care, right? Okay, people don't like this economy. It sucks. And for the record, I just want to remind everybody that for a year, liberals were screaming at people, stop complaining about the economy. You're going to hurt the electoral chances. Well, where the hell are we now, right? The whole point of this is that liberals have wanted to believe that by appealing to the better angels of our nature, that somehow or another, they would go ahead and continue to rubber stamp the status quo, right? It's not happening. It's not happening. And by the way, it's not just the racist whites in rural communities, and they absolutely voted for Donald Trump. It's also a bunch of people in rural communities who are exasperated. The Democratic Party doesn't talk to them anymore. And by the way, Black voters, Hispanic voters, women, you name it, across the board, there are people who are tired of the way that this country works, and they were given two choices between a candidate who basically said, I'm going to continue the policies of the last 4 years, or another candidate who said, I'm going to tear it all down. And they pushed their chips in the middle. And by the way, racism, sexism, Christian nationalism, xenophobia, gay and transphobia, those things play into it. But those pieces of prejudice, they are activated by one thing and one thing only, Nick: self-interest. That's the whole thing. It's, nobody wants to say I'm selfish. Nobody wants to say that I'm self absorbed or I'm narcissistic or whatever. They find a lens to get through that, right? Which is like the Jews are after me, or black people are dangerous, right? And white people are naturally superior, or the immigrants are coming to do this. However, they get there in order to square that cognitive dissonance, they'll do it. The problem here is that we actually had an election that needed to be about material conditions, and it became about, do you feel good about who you're voting for? And with those two things, people chose their own material self-interest. Doesn't mean that they're going to get helped. Doesn't mean Donald Trump is actually going to do anything for them. He's going to make it worse. But when it came down to it, those were the two issues. And the growing of the Republican electorate and the right-wing trajectory of this country is predicated on selfishness and self-centeredness that isn't actually being dealt with.
Right. And the problem is we've seen decade upon decade of people voting that way, not getting the benefit of it.
That's right.
But not getting it and still not changing, because nobody wants to be wrong. And this is sort of, we've probably forgot that this is sort of what was happening in 2016, was that like what was people were digging into was they cannot admit they were wrong. This is what Trump sort of tapped into in the very beginning. Never admit you're wrong. Just keep attacking whatever, because then you have to actually have some self-reflection. I haven't said the phrase self-reflection in a long time, but that was the big phrase I used all the time. And so that's what he was able to begin it with. And then when you use the lying and then anger and hate and disgust of other people, it's not a level playing field. And so I don't know if the Bill Clinton style of coming in there and really explaining like he was so good at how these things could benefit people, I'm not even sure that works anymore. That early 90s style might not get through, because again, you'd have to get people to understand, to say to themselves, shit, I was wrong. We've seen some of those testimonies. We've seen people come over from the Trump side and realize that, but obviously we've seen a double and triple and quadruple downing on the other way. And then, like, listen, we're going to have Musk come in here and cut $2 trillion of spending in the government, overnight or whatever, right? Or in a short time. He's already acknowledged it's going to cause pain, right? Whatever that even means. We know RFK Jr. is now going to take over the health system. Okay. I literally was even in bed when I woke up this morning trying to wrap my head around that, thinking, well, I don't know, maybe could there be something that would be good about this, streamlining some things, maybe getting some corruption out of some of these agencies. I mean, that's where you end up getting to. And like now you're starting to say, okay, well, maybe we should give them a chance. Maybe Project 2025 will end up being really good for everybody. Like, seriously, that's where I'm starting to now follow into. And because who knows, what does anybody know about any of this anymore, right? Twitter, what Musk did to Twitter, he wants to do to the country. And somehow in their minds, Twitter is much better, and it's still like you can click on a tweet, it will open up, you can still read it. Like a lot of the other shit doesn't really work that well. But then again, the argument has always been a lot of the shit in the government doesn't work that well anyway. So now I'm trying to sell MAGA to everybody. Am I? That's what I'm doing here. I guess that's what I'm doing here. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, you know. Like that's Project 2025 is not going to be good for the country. I do have a note of hope in all of this, but I do want to say one thing very, very quickly. I've said for a long time that this is a mental health crisis in this country. What you talked about with Bill Clinton, particularly in an era where it felt like things were improving to a certain extent, if people are not terrified and activated in fight or flight, you can talk to them logically and you can make logical decisions. When you are in a moment of panic and fear, you're not making rational decisions. That's why you can't go out and talk about means testing. People right now don't want means testing. You know what I mean? They don't want credits. They want fundamentally for something to change. What has happened in this country is that we have a country of people who are not mentally well. And I don't just mean MAGA people. There are a lot of people who are delusional, who are living in their own fantasies. And by the way, like, there's no other way to put it, as somebody who has worked on this stuff himself. We have a nation of addicts who are addicted to getting what they want, when they want it, and how they want it, right? They don't necessarily, like, that's more comfortable than facing the reality. Recovery is tiring, Nick. Actually working on yourself is a tiring thing. So what is Donald Trump? He's an enabler. He
Mhm.
is the type of person who tells people what they want to hear, when they want to hear it, no matter the self-destruction. On a better note, Nick, last night, as these results started to crystallize, I had a conversation with a lot of, how do I put this? Like-minded individuals, people like me who have been documenting this, who have been analyzing it and speaking out against it. And there was a lot of talk about safety. There was a lot of talk about trying to keep ourselves, protected in this upcoming period. But you know what piece of hope there is in this, besides the fact that there are numbers there that are possible? The good news here is that these people are fucking incompetent. Elon Musk is incompetent.
Mhm.
Donald Trump is incompetent. The entire group of them, they're backbiting, betraying groups of assholes. That's one of the things that helped us in the first Trump administration. The idea that they're going to be able to wield power effectively, we don't know that that's a possibility yet. We still have a chance that they're not going to be able to construct what they need to. In the meantime, we need to figure out what we're doing and where we're going. That means processing our feelings. That means figuring out who we are and where we're going and figuring out how it is we're going to fight because we have to. There's no choice beyond that. You can go ahead and say you're going to check out. Somebody last night on Twitter said to me, I'm just going to go in the basement. They're coming in the basement. You know what I mean? Like, you can hang out in the basement all you want, but there's going to come a knock on the door of that basement. So it's time to face reality, get rid of these like conventional, delusional fantasies, and like get in the actual fight. But it's going to take some time for some people to get there, I think.
I mean, is there concern that what we do is going to be a problem for the administration? Are
Sure.
they crack down on that kind of thing? Are we going to get audited all like randomly for no reason?
I think auditing would be the least of our problems if we're going to be honest about it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. It's like when he ran, he's saying we're going to deport 11 million people or whatever that number is, and you kind of think that he's just lip service, red meat. He doesn't really mean any of that. But Jared, have you ever seen the movie Strangers on a Train?
Sure.
So it's a Hitchcock movie. If you haven't seen it, two guys on a train, and they kind of decide, and they're kind of talking shit and whatever. Hey, my wife, she's cheating on me. Like, it got to be nice if someone killed her. And the guy's like, fine, I'll kill her if you kill my father. And the guy's, oh, yeah, okay, great, whatever. Guess what? Next week comes by, the guy does it. He kills the other lady. Goes, okay, it's your turn. Now you got to kill my dad, whoever it was. You got to uphold the other bargain. And so part of me feels like Stephen Miller is the psychopath on the train along with Trump. And when Trump had promised this stuff, Miller is going to have it all ready to go, and he's going to figure out how to get the money and figure out how to hire enough of these ICE, work people. And before he knows it, it's already going to be in place and happening. And we're going to have it's going to crater the economy. B, it's going to be A should be the absolute tragedy that will cause families and people across the board, including actual citizens. So, and then B, the economy, all those different things. So that's the worry that like these things are already now put into place or are going to be put into place. They're already much more organized. They've already kind of cleared the bastions of any non-loyalists. So they have control over everything now. They have control over the Supreme Court. That's probably the biggest issue because, Alito and Thomas are going to retire. They're going to replace them with 40-something-year-old people. And then the rest of my life will be under, and by the way, I wouldn't put it past Roberts to retire. I honestly think Roberts could retire. They'll put like Kavanaugh or whatever, and then they'll get another one. It really, really control this court, and because Roberts might realize, what's the difference, and I might as well get some of that nice, money and live nicely for the rest of my life. So, these are things we have to fight against, I suppose. But I guess the real key for me would be obviously 2026. Because in any normal, period of our time, 2026 would see a blue wave, right? Without question, 2026 would have a massive shift. You'd see the control of Congress, and and then heading into the presidency the next time. If that doesn't happen, then I'm concerned. Then that really is the time to move or something. I don't know what would happen. That would be the real red line.
So we need to wrap up, but I want to leave people with two thoughts. First of all, Nick, everything that you just said, I think is pretty correct. I will say within it, you said you don't see any way forward in this thing. I would invite you and our listeners to realize that what you just described is an actual scenario based on things as they exist. So if things as they exist cannot change, you have to change things as they exist. That includes, how are we going to talk about the Supreme Court? How are we going to talk about federal power? What is it in this system that needs to change? So I would invite people to think about that. The other invitation before we sign off, Nick, is this. We have spent our lives as Americans, because we've been inundated with the fantasies of World War II and what America did in World War II.
Mhm,
We've seen all these movies such as Schindler's List, right? We've seen all these things, and we've always said, "Oh my God, I can't believe what people went through in there, or people went along with this. I would have acted different." This is what I need to say to people. You're in the 1920s, you're in the 1930s now.
mhm,
You now have your chance to prove what you would do in that time. And people right now need to sit around, deal with your feelings, but also come to terms with what it is that they're willing to do and what it is they're not willing to do. And Nick, we will be back with coverage on Friday. I appreciate you, my friend. I really enjoyed being able to go through the election with you.
yeah, well, just let my rants I just did be the motivation to connect with
Sure.
what you're saying. I suppose is what why this is hopefully will resonate with people.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so. And I think it is a time of self-reflection. I think what you said is exactly right. And I just want to say again, thank you everybody for trusting us. We're here for you. We know you're here for us. We'll be back with our regular coverage on Friday, unless there's a need for an emergency broadcast. Thank you, everybody. Good luck.